join us, please. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you all. We'll call the meeting to order. If we could let the record reflect, please, that the board met in executive session to discuss matters leading to the appointment, employment, or promotion of a particular person or persons, collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law, the Taylor Law, and current or pending litigation. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see you. Our first action is the approval of the minutes from January 24th. Do I have a motion? I think I have a second also. All in favor? Thank you, trustees. Action 3 would be the approval of the treasurer's report from December. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
And a second. Is there any discussion, or does anyone have any questions?
Nope.
Thank you. All in favor? Okay, that brings us to 4, which is the report of the superintendent.
Very
Dr.
good.
Treviso, the
Thank
floor
you.
is yours.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So tonight, can you hear me now? Right. Tonight's a really important night for us. I'll be presenting the 2019-20 preliminary budget. Before I actually get there, just wanted to give a little background. It's a zero-based budget process that we go through every single year. This is a spending plan that's built to support the 3 pillars of the strategic plan. The budget that I'm proposing maintains favorable class size, all of our special and general education programs. We have some really cool enhancements that we're going to go through, both in special ed and general ed and all throughout the grade levels. All of our extracurricular and athletic programs remain in place. It's designed to manage our short-term financial needs, our long-term financial needs, and it is an investment in both the present and the future of North Shore's children. I'm looking forward to taking you through the presentation this evening, and as well as our line-by-line budget process that will begin shortly thereafter. As an update, our search to identify our next assistant superintendent for instruction is moving along as planned. We received 88 applications for the position. Olivia and I then interviewed 24 of the most I know, right? We interviewed 24 of the most promising candidates, and now we have 6 really, truly outstanding candidates who are meeting with committees next week. We have a total of 41 administrators, central office staff, parents, teachers, and students who will spend time getting to know the candidates. And our goal out of that process is to identify 3 semifinalists who will then come back and meet with me for an extended interview. And then 2 of those will be invited back to interview with the board. And then we're looking towards an appointment sometime in March. So we're getting there. If you haven't done so, please make sure to log in and participate in our thought exchange. As of this evening, and probably a little bit more now, but when I left my office about 2 hours ago, we had 1,566 staff members, community members, and students in grades 3 through 12 participate. We had 2,628 thoughts posted, and they've been shared, and we have 98,274 thoughts, 98,274 ratings of those thoughts, all in about a week and a half. So good job, North Shore. With 1 day left, I hope that you'll consider providing your input, as this will help us to scope and prioritize our possible future tax-neutral bond. I'm a competitive guy, so I'm hoping to get those star ratings up above 10,000 or 100,000 before they close, so, keep them coming. As you could likely imagine, our needs exceed our what we can afford, but we're looking forward to a good final result. Our first community forum will be scheduled for Tuesday, March 5th. We got sort of a week or 2 behind where we wanted to be, but I think it makes better sense for us to do this after the February break than like a week after February break than right after the February break. So we're going to hold that first community forum on Tuesday, March 5th at 7 p.m. right in this room. We'll be communicating details next week, so please plan to attend. All are welcome. And then right after that, I know I see a couple of faces in here who have volunteered to be on the Bond Advisory Committee. Once that community forum happens, then we'll have you all back for, we'll have that Bond Advisory group get together and start to work with the board and me. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been hearing a lot of concerns within the community about reserves and other matters related to the schools, and I wanted to address a couple of those here tonight. And I'm really, like, I thought I might be talking to an empty room, so this is delightful. We have consistently been informed that the district is in strong financial health. We received a 0 score of fiscal stress from the New York State Comptroller's Office most recently. We currently maintain a AA1 bond rating from Moody's. That's the second highest rating available to municipalities. If you are interested, there are lots and many financial documents available on our website for people to take a look at. Those include budget documents and adopted budgets, our 5-year expenditure reports, our treasurer and audit reports. We have a new document up there on the status of district reserves. As in the past, I'll present the 5-year plan to the board, and we'll continue to have in-depth discussions including the status of the district's reserve funds. Every district allocates funds differently according to the needs of their students and their communities, so it's hard to really look at what a reserve status in North Shore and how that compares to what's happening in other places, because people have different priorities and different needs based on where they are. If you look back sort of historically at all districts, you'll see that almost all districts saw a rise in reserve levels after the implementation of the tax cap and after the 2008 global financial crisis. And there were reasons for that. Schools were forced to really carefully look at their reserve funds so that programs could be maintained, so that our facilities could receive the care that they need, and that we would avoid unanticipated unnatural spikes in budgets. That's kind of the worst thing for school districts and municipalities when we're budgeting, is we try to avoid spikes. We like to have nice, even planning. So if we have reserves with which to draw from to even out those spikes, that's a good use of reserves. They are undoubtedly an important planning tool, and they are generally used by local governments and school districts to save for future needs and other allowable expenses that they are set up to fund. So a reserve fund acts like a bank account. It allows school districts in New York State to set money aside for use in the future. Benefits of reserves include the following. It helps us to plan ahead and save for the future. It helps us to maintain a stable operating budget by mitigating the financial impact of major non-recurring or unforeseen expenditures in our annual budget. It helps us to balance budgets. We pull money in from our reserves every year to offset the tax levy to our tax base. It helps us to maintain a stable tax levy. There are years that the CPI is high in this year, and so in this current fiscal year, you see the CPI is set at 2%. So, and then with some allowables, exemptions, the allowable cap goes up. In recent years, as recently as within the past 3 to 5 years, the cap has been set at 0.12. And so having available monies in reserves allows you to accommodate for when you are just not allowed to tax at a higher level. It also, as I mentioned before, it boosts our overall fiscal strength. So having available monies gives you flexibility. So let me tell you a little bit more about reserves. We currently have restricted reserves and we have unrestricted reserves. I talked about this a couple of meetings ago, but I want to talk a little bit more about that. Our current restricted reserve funds total $15,532,032.23. That money can only be used for very, very specific reasons that are based on either real or actuarial financial exposure. Examples include the capital reserve. We need voter approval to put that money in. we need voter for a specific purpose. We need voter approval to take that out for a specific purpose, like the air conditioning of the large spaces. Those reserves were set up for that purpose. When we wanted to take it out, like we did last year, there was a proposition on the budget line to take that out. We can't just go and get it. We have a repair reserve that is strictly used for repairs, so if something significant breaks, if we have a septic tank that needs to be repaired, that can cost $100,000. We have resources to be able to do that. We have a workers' compensation reserve that pays claims for injuries sustained on the job by district employees. We are self-insured. We have to have, before we can access any resource at all on workers' compensation, we have to have $650,000 of expenditure before we could even access anything from our insurance company. So that requires us to reserve money. There's been some question about what's called the EBLR reserve, the Employee Benefit Accrued Liability Reserve. That's $333,168.14. And this is used to pay the monetary value of unused leave time by employees when they retire or leave the school district in 2 of our bargaining units, clerical and custodial only. The balance in this reserve is the total of the accrued but unpaid vacation time of the district's custodians, 58 of them, and clerical staff, 43 and a half, as of June 30, 2018. All of our custodians and clericals earn their vacation time throughout the year, but they, per their bargaining agreements, they're required to take them after the close of the fiscal year in June. And then when they leave, they might have this, this little contractual benefit that we have to have, the contractual, thank you, contractual benefit that we need to then fund them. We then have unrestricted reserve funds, and they total $3,984,879.78, and those are monies set aside to offset the LIPA, impact of the LIPA. So we had monies granted to us via state aid from Senator Marcelino and Assemblyman Levine, and so we have been using that money. There is a planned use, and so we have hit the apex of our use of it, and this is the first year where we're starting to wean that down. You're going to see a slide later if you hang in there with me tonight on with some ice cubes that are melting, and that's how we want to use reserves. We want we want reserves. We want to use the melting ice approach. So I want the community to never feel the impact of the use of those reserves. So as I use them, I spike up and then I spike down over a long period of time. So when they go away, you will never feel the impact of the loss of that that reserve, that funding source, because if you do, we have a couple of options. We either have to take that money out of program or we have to raise taxes. The money has to come from one of those 2 places. So we also have an unassigned fund balance, excuse me, and that's capped at 4% of our budget. And so that totals $4,318,728.60. That's our rainy day fund, right? So that is like that's like your college fund for your kids. You put that money there and you hope that you never intend to use it. That's the God forbid money, right? That's right. So this is and then we have other monies that so when you look at that, what Newsday reported, there was like a $29 million number. So there's also monies that we carry over. So at the end of a year, we have lots of bills and purchase orders that are open that we haven't received services for or we're waiting for, or whatever, any number of things. At the end, when June 30th comes, we can't just say, that's it, we can't pay you anymore. So we have to encumber that money into the next fiscal year. And so that looks like a reserve. That looks like a reserved pot of money. It's included in that $29 million that Newsday reported. And then we also have the carry forward money that we use from one budget to the next to offset the levy. So that's how it all sort of comes together. I get it, they are complex and they can frustrate people to no end because people look at them and they say, why do you have all this money? Um, that said, only a very small percentage of what we have is discretionary, and the remainder, like I said earlier, is tied to real expenses, actuarial exposure. And I would say to any member of the community, if you are interested or want to get engaged in this, you are welcome to make an appointment with me. And Olivia, we will sit with you. We will go through them. We will, share with you what we have and help you understand this phenomena. So you all look very attentive, and I appreciate that. I hope this is helpful in being clear about what is. I'm going to wrap up there and say I want to wish everybody a very happy break. Where I live, they call this February break Mud Week, right? And
Call it Florida.
right, it's called Mud Week. And so when I first moved there, I was like, what is this Mud Week all about? And then all you have to do is like walk outside and see why it's called Mud Week. So, so from where I live to where you live, happy Mud Week. I hope you have a great week and some great travels planned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. When exactly will the thought exchange link come down? Because I'm sure people are anxious to share their thoughts about the future of the school district.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, early, late.
I think
Some people cut it close.
late, after close of business, maybe even into the evening. I don't know.
Tonight, tomorrow.
We'll
Don't drag it out too late, people.
we'll make it in the nighttime, right, Shelley? Okay.
Your ice cubes analogy, I just want to point out, you don't intend to deplete the reserves. You intend to bring down certain items,
Correct.
LIPA, tax cert, et cetera, and leave others to meet the long-term liabilities.
Right. The whole point of that analogy is I wouldn't advise the board to say we have a budget shortfall this year of $2 million, right? And so we will go to one of our reserves and we will take that $2 million out and we will fill that hole, that revenue hole, with that $2 million from reserves, right? Because that only works as long as you have that $2 million in reserves available to you to draw down upon. Once that $2 million goes away, you then are what I call at a cliff, right? So then you don't have the revenue source to to draw from anymore. So where do you get it? You either have to get it from your program and staffing, or you need to get it from taxes.
Because it affects, just so we're clear, because it affects how you calculate the cap.
Absolutely, Mary
Because
Ann.
the revenue comes in, and that will affect how much we can levy the following year.
That's absolutely true.
I'll also add you have reserves, say a capital reserve fund, you've got like, I think 3.4 million there, but it is really intended to be spent in the same year. There are capital reserve funds where the money comes in and out relatively quickly. The capital reserve fund is different than
Right, so the
it's like we intend to spend it on the items the voters approved at the last election sooner rather than later.
in every circumstance. So the way a capital reserve fund works is when the board establishes the capital reserve fund, it establishes it for a very specific purpose. You could have multiple capital reserves open at the same time, and it has
If only you could fund it.
right, but it also has a cap on the amount of money that can ever be in it in its lifetime. So if you set the cap up on the capital reserve to not exceed $10 million, let's say, you can't spend down 5 and then keep going back, God bless you, and then keep going back, so then it's 15, right? So it's
Right.
10 is 10 is 10 is 10, right? So once you establish that with voter approval,
Yep.
you then have all of your, God bless you, you have all of your lists of projects that you then work towards reserving for, and then when you have a project of significance, like the cooling of the large spaces, we then have to put that out to the voters to approve the use of that money, right? And so that, and then it goes up to state ed, and then that money gets spent out of the reserve.
Right. So when you look at
That's right.
And when you look at our property tax report card online with the controller, it shows you not just restricted reserves, but it shows you our intent to spend them this year too. And that's very different than just assuming it's kind of
That's right.
money out there.
So that's a good question and good clarification. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really, thank you. That
You're
was
welcome.
Very informative, very clear. We appreciate your time
You're welcome.
in putting that together.
And so we will, I will thank Olivia for this as well. This wasn't all out of my brain, and, Shelley helped to put some of the stuff together too. So thank you for helping that to come
And
together.
no one has to remember it. It's on the website.
No, and we'll get all of
You can
this.
Look anytime. It'll be in the minutes.
Right, and we'll get this into, poor Betty. That's a lot
And
of information.
You can watch the video. You can
Yes.
live this moment again over and over.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Next on the agenda is the report from the SGO. John, thank you.
Thanks. Well, I mean, Dr. Giroso, I don't really know where you're from, but from here, February break's usually frozen solid. So I'm not really sure where mud wheat comes from.
And most people think I live upstate, and it's really just right across the sound. It's really very close.
Yeah.
Waze tells me it's 9 miles.
I don't know if that's true. Okay. All right. Well, a few things going on in our schools, I guess I can tell you about. First, we were happy to send some student representatives to help with the choosing process of the assistant superintendent. That was a great way to show some student voice in these processes. Also, some student achievements that have been going on. There's science research. A bunch of kids, or a couple kids, submitted to the junior science and humanities symposium in the fall. They had made it through to the semifinals and presented their research in front of a lot of really smart people with PhDs in their fields. This Sunday they did that to compete for the finalist competition. Also, 6 projects had went to the Long Island Science and Engineering Fair this week, and 4 of them had made it through to the next round, will compete for the finalist competition, and that'll be in a month. Also,
One of those people are you.
yeah, those
Yeah.
people are me. Thank you. And Kate Wesley Jones, Miss Jones' daughter.
But she wasn't at JSHS, and you were. So
Yes.
you've got 2 of those.
Kate also won the psychology fair, something that I can't do. So, also this morning the French exchange kids left, or our exchange kids, like our students left for France. We'll be getting their exchange students also in a month, but they're gone for about 2 weeks now, living a different life in France, which is kind of exciting. As a Latin student, I don't get to do that, but I wish I did. Also, let's see. Well, it's February now, so you know that I'm going to be on it about sports night things. So we chose our theme, which is TV channels, contrary to my liking, but it's okay. Seniors are Disney Channel, juniors are Nick, sophomores are ESPN, don't know how. And the freshmen are MTV, and yes, they do know what MTV is. We had to make sure
It's not music
that.
anymore.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's about it for this week. So see you all next week.
Thank you. It was
Thank you, John.
very informative and entertaining. We appreciate it. Congratulations and good luck at the next round of LISAP. Thank you, John. We will now move on to regular business. Tonight's feature presentation is the superintendent's budget presentation,
very
which I
much.
think a lot of you are looking forward to.
Thank you. John, you ready to present with me? No?
Studies, have work to do. It's the whole day of class.
You're not tired of me yet, so that's a good thing. Okay. So tonight I'm here to present the 2019-2020 proposed budget. The way the budget process works in New York is that prior to the board's adoption of the budget, which happens which is scheduled to happen here, I think, on March 28th, with a meeting. It's the superintendent's preliminary, so it's my budget that I present to the board, and then the board gives us some feedback. We move it along, and then at the in March, April, whenever they adopt it, it becomes their budget that we present to the community. This process starts, scarily enough, in like early October. So we all but get ourselves, our sea legs moving in the beginning of the year, and we're already thinking about the upcoming school year. We start at zero every single year. You'll say, so if you look at this, you'll say, well, if you start at zero every year, why are those lines the same number? Because sometimes, like, graduation caps and gowns cost the same thing from one year to the next. Paper costs are pretty stable. Like, there are some things in the rhythm that are pretty consistent from year to year. We also try to not exceed where we were in the previous school year, so we can accommodate for expenses in other places. So as I said to you before, the charge that I make to all of our administrators and budget developers is that the budget is one of the most important things that we do, because it supports our values and the goals that we set forward. So all of last year we spent building our strategic plan. We had 3,000 people tell us what was important to them. We had committees and focus groups and all of that, and we came together on our 3 pillars structured around teaching and learning, equity for all learners, and social emotional learning. And then there are a series of action steps that we've set out to accomplish over the course of 5 years. The budget is built to support those strategic targets. And you will see evidence of that as we go through the presentation, I hope. So our goals for this budget process were to remain sensitive to the fiscal pressures faced by the residents, and be mindful of the taxes that you pay. We don't want to take that for granted. We set out to address all of our instructional program needs in line with our shared valued outcomes and the 3 pillars of the plan. When we meet with administrators, we talk with them about how their budget requests are supporting the specific pillars or goals or SVOs. That's all very clearly articulated. If you, once this all gets posted to our website, there for every single functional budget area, there is a corresponding written narrative that speaks to the why we need what we're asking, why we're asking for what we're asking for, and how it ties back into these very targets. We set out to provide a safe and healthy learning environment for students and staff. We are always continuing to upgrade our technology infrastructure. Very important to us is to keep our teachers and our administrators current in their practices, so there are resources for professional development. And we have to comply with all of the New York State and federal mandates. Many of them are unfunded, so some for good reason, some we wonder why, but we still have to do them. And whatever it is, we have to, sometimes it costs money to do that. So I talked a little bit about this, but when we build the budget, I meet with my team. I share with them the district goals and the assumptions that we are working with. We then ask the administrators to go back, work on their zero-based proposals based on the priorities that I've set forth, the goals, the initiatives, the SVOs, the strategic plan. We look at all of our prior years' approved budgets to make sure that the requested things that we've asked for were actually purchased. So if the other thing with this is we're building a spending plan 18 months before we even spend $1. So there is while there are some things that are definitely hardwired into what we're doing, other things are our best guess, and that's why we have the ability to have budget transfers, and sometimes our priorities shift is once we get moving. We look at actual expenditures for the past 5 years. So how do I calculate how much electricity I'm going to need in the budget? How do I calculate how much gas or oil I'm going to need, or all of those things? I look at 5-year averages to calculate that. We review all of our contractual obligations under each labor contract to project salaries. So when as you go through the projections, those are real people and real dollars calculated person by person that comprises that number. When you look at our salary lines, you'll say, wow, those are big numbers. It's because we're a people business. Our work is in people. 81% of our budget is comprised in salary and benefits. And so that leaves us with a much smaller window of what is discretionary. We look at all of our new staffing requests to ensure alignment with the district goals and the strategic plan. We go through every single person, or God bless you. So we've been doing that over the past several months, and as recently as this week, we look at every single person, God bless you. We look at their, what our student needs are, and how we support what those needs are by person, okay? And then we look at trends to project healthcare and other employee benefit costs, because sometimes those numbers are not solid, so we have some sense of where they're gonna be, but the teacher's retirement system may not publish their number right away. The employee retirement system may not publish their number right away. Health insurance costs don't always get published in time for us to hard line a number in, but once we have that number, we can make that adjustment. And then there's state aid. So the governor puts out the state, and we'll get to revenues in a little bit, but governor puts out his, in this case it is a he, his budget. It then gets evaluated by the Senate and the Assembly, and then the 3 budgets have to come together into a final budget that in statute has to be done by April 1. So let's take a look at our expenses. These are our appropriations. As you go through these, you'll see that our general support is up 4.4%. Our instruction is up 3.7%. Transportation is up 0.7%. Community service is flat. Our benefits are actually down a little bit based on projections. And our debt service, tax service is up by 8.4%. The reason for that is because we're transferring. So we have debt that's rolling off, and so we're using that monies in the capital lines, right? So we have talked about this over the past year and a half, that the reason how we're going to build a tax neutral bond is by using debt service that's falling off. So while we build the scope of that work, we will take that money out of debt service. Debt service is what we use to pay our debt, our principal and interest payments. So we will slide it into building projects and infrastructure so we can get that work done. And then pending the approval by our voters, we will slide that money back into debt service so we keep the expenditure flat. It will just be in 2 different places, but you'll see a big spike and a big decrease on certain lines of the budget when that happens. The proposed 1920 budget is $1,799,995, which is a dollar change of roughly $2.9 million, and a percent change of 2.795. Those are the expenditures. What are the drivers? Safety and security. We have put a lot of resources in safety and security. You'll see we've increased personnel and upgrades. That's up 6% for next year. We did some moving around of supervisors in our budget, so that in addition to the contractual increases, those movements cause that increase. And regular instruction is up 2.7%. Special ed across the district is 6.3%. So if there was some, if you remember last year, there was some special ed concerns about we were reducing the budget, were we reducing it too much? We really build this on student by student needs. So this year it's a little bit, it's up a little bit more. Last year was down a little bit, but it's all taken care of. We have tuition increases. So St. Christopher's is in our district. We have to lay that money out for tuition payments for students who are placed at St. Christopher's in New York City. We eventually get that money back, but we do have to lay it out, and that's a real cost for us to do that. We have students that we send to BOCES for occupational education and guidance services, which I will explain to you in a little bit why that number is so much higher. Okay, so if we were to just roll over the budget and add not a single anything new or a single enhancement, we were to just take the 18-19 budget and say, pick you up and move you into 19-20 and just take our contractual obligations forward, the percent increase is 2.83. So we've actually had to accommodate for that because we're actually proposing a budget that's a little bit less than that. Does that make sense? So what's happening with our contracts, many of our contracts are going up 1.5% next year, and that's on top of some steps that that are involved in the contracts as well. So those things we can't not do them, and so that's what that number means. Okay, this is just budget drivers for our visual learners. But you'll see there the important takeaway there is really. Does this thing have a? It does. Yeah. So if you look here, you'll see that the biggest portion of the pie is instruction. That's our special ed and general ed, and then if you capture in the supervision of teaching and learning, which is an important part of the instructional process, you end up with a really big portion of the pie, almost 75%. Okay, so let me take you through what's new. We've added, in 18-19, we added extra security hours to the elementary schools until 6 p.m., the middle school until 8 p.m., the high school until 10 p.m. For 19-20, we'll be covering district-wide athletic and performing arts events with security personnel. We will be providing outside security for after-school events, and we will have parking lots, recess, and after-school programs covered with security. This is about $150,000 worth of ads that are new in 19-20. These things up here were all new. New spending in 18-19, and so we have to bring those forward because we didn't anticipate those expenditures in 18-19. We put them in. They weren't built into the budget from the year before. We put them in, so we have to carry them forward because we have to continue to pay for them. We've hired a safety coordinator, and we are putting LED lights around the perimeter of the Glen Head School and pole lights at the high school parking lot. That's an ad for next year. We're installing security cameras and lighting around the middle school softball field. We are installing a gate at the front entrance of Glenwood Landing. We are repairing a fence behind the water service building, repairing a fence on Plymouth Drive, the Plymouth Drive property line. We hired the health and safety consultant, and we are subscribing to a BOCES camera monitoring system so we can keep track of all of what's happening. We're also upgrading our school buses, so student ID cards we're working on giving the student ID cards to board the school buses. We'll be putting card readers on school buses and retrofitting 15 large buses with cameras. Believe it or not, we don't use them all the time, but if we need them, they tend to be pretty helpful. Because if your kids are anything like my kids, sometimes they don't make great decisions when they don't think someone's watching. Just saying. Okay, so what do we have to support the instructional budget? And this is really, so think back to what I talked to you about before with the strategic plan, with the SVOs. This is where all this gets supported. We made a major goal of building our STEM, science, technology, engineering program at the secondary level. So what's happening? We're reallocating a 0.5 FTE in math to support enrichment in grade 7 at no cost. We've included a full-time health and wellness teacher that will support our 4th and 5th grade students at the elementary level for next year. We've added a full-time counselor at the elementary program, so that's regulatory. So the state is requiring that elementary children have access to a guidance counselor, and we don't really have the resources among the middle school or the high school counselors to draw that down. So we've added that into the budget for next year. We've added a full-time special ed teacher by converting a couple of TAs. We're working on expanding the full-day ICT program, and so this budget calls for full-day ICT in grades K through 3 for next year. This year we're just piloting in grade 1, so that is special ed teacher, general ed teacher together all day, every day, rather than teacher one day, teaching assistant the next day. So we don't need quite as many teaching assistants, but we did need one more teacher to do that. So it was budget neutral. The budget has a 0.4 FTE, which stands for full-time equivalent. So a full-time teacher is a 1.0 FTE. A 0.4 is 40% of that. And at the middle school and high school level, that's generally 2 periods. So that we've added we have some ENL needs that we have to support among new learners who are coming to the country. We've added coding as a short experience for all 8th graders next year into the program. So all 8th graders will be learning how to code. We've added a journalism writing elective at the middle school. We're expanding Mandarin up to 11th grade for next year, so that program continues to grow. And as that program continues to grow, we need, every year you see, if you look at these historically, it's like every year you're adding a 0.2 Mandarin. Why is that every year you're adding a 0.2 Mandarin? Because kids are sticking with the program, and every year we need to, right. So they need a teacher. I asked the high school, in an effort to really start to chip away at building our STEM program. There will be 4 new electives in the course catalog. One is gaming, one is app building, and robotics. A third is robotics, and a 4th is cybersecurity. And so those will be electives that kids will be able to take next year at the high school. We are finally, I know this has been aspirational for many, many years, so I'm super excited about it. We're adding a dance to the high school program for our students. So we've got a 0.4, so two periods, one for theater and one for dance. It'll be in the fine arts department. And we've added we're adding a 0.4 reading teacher for students with special needs at the elementary level. We're expanding our Chromebooks to grades 5 and 9, so that will cover, where's Elliot? 5, 6, 7, 9. Right, 8, 9. Yeah, we tried to do 8, and then we ran out of money. So. And then, as part of our strategic plan, one of the core components of what we are looking to accomplish is innovative 21st century learning spaces, flexible furniture, flexible spaces, and so we have put in a pilot program for one in each building, where we will identify a high-end, a high-frequency user in one of these spaces, outfit a classroom so they could pilot that, and that will inform as we inform our scope and spending as we work towards any bond work, because that might become part of what we do in classrooms. So that's for every school. And there are some really cool things that folks are doing in classrooms. Desks that pull apart, come together, their desks, their tables, they roll around, they have walls that turn into whiteboards. There's a lot of cool things that can happen. Okay, and we're not done. So we've added, as in a short experience, the first robotics to all first graders for next year. And through coding, electronics, and robotics, we are giving high school students an opportunity to engage in a cycle of computer science. We are introducing the first health science competition for our high school students. We're incorporating digital portfolios as a pilot for middle schoolers. I talked to you about the coding course at the middle school. We're introducing ProQuest, which is a research tool. It's a scholarly database for students to do research in. And we're looking at expanding media and literacy experiences in a variety of ways. So we've got committees looking at how to draw student voice and choice out through their media selections. It's actually one of the targets in our strategic plan. The first Legos, they'll also do the junior challenge competitions. There is a global connection club that's built into the budget for next year. We've built a young math minds and young scientist club for next year. We have a program that we're going to pilot called the Power of One program. We'll talk more about that as we move forward. We're systematically planning for the implementation of full-day integrated co-teaching throughout the program, so K, 1, 2, 3, and then we'll bring that up into 4 and 5 in the years ahead. And then all of our PD. So we also have a whole bunch of unknowns in this moment, even though we have a proposed spending plan. So the executive budget is not completed yet, so that will inform our state aid. There's, there could, I don't expect this to happen, but there could always be a rollback. That happened, speaking of the reserves, that happened a bunch of years ago where we got, when the, were any of you involved in the writing letters around the foundation aid and the, what was the other aid we lost? The gap elimination aid, when the governor pulled all that, money back from districts at the last minute. That could feasibly happen. I don't think it will, but it might. We're looking at our health insurance costs for 2020, which are unknown. We always have lines in the budget for health and safety needs that are ongoing, so when something comes up and it's a health and safety need, we don't know necessarily what they are, but we have resources to be able to take care of them. Our enrollment may change, so we build contingency positions into our budget process. So in this budget, we have 2 elementary positions that are unassigned. So in the event that there's a spike in enrollment somewhere or patterns change somewhere, we don't have to worry about where that's going to come from. It's a planned surplus to accommodate for a need that we might not know of yet. Kindergarten registration just started. So that will, that can change. We are projecting 3 sections for each of the 3 schools for kindergarten for next year. But there's always, from what I can see in North Shore, there's always a hot school and a hot grade that makes everybody a little wiggly. we do our best to plan for implementation of IEPs, but there's annual reviews are just getting started, and our direction to the special ed, or my direction to the special ed department is, you don't make recommendations based on what you think you have in terms of monies. You make recommendations based on what students need, and so what we think they may need right now may change based on a CSE meeting that happens in a couple of months, and we have to accommodate for that. And then our course selections, those are just getting started. So 12th graders are getting close to being done. 11th graders are getting close to being done. 9th and 10th graders are just sort of getting that moving. So we put this out, and we don't have a great sense of our final section counts yet, but we keep an eye on that. And then come March, April, we spend several days as a leadership team looking at all of those course requests, staffing assignments, and we try to match need. And then there are sometimes we have to collapse classes, there are sometimes we have to add sections. It's a very fluid process. Okay, so now we have revenues. So where does the revenue come from? We have split properties. So split properties are properties that rest in 2 school districts. So we share properties with Roslyn, Locust Valley, Glen Cove, and that's it. And so if you have a home that sits on both school districts, you actually get to choose which one you want to go to. And you do that at the time when you buy your home. You can't change it willy-nilly, but you get to do that. So we have some students whose properties rest in any of those 3 places, and we have students come choose North Shore from all 3, and then we bill back to Locust Valley, to Roslyn, to Glen Cove for the cost of that tuition, and we pay those costs back to them for the boundaries that we share as well. Okay. And then there's a whole series of we have revenue that comes in from the peaking stations. We have state aid that's right now set at $5.5 million. That's actually a nice bump from last year. We're up $300,000. Then we have so if you look down here, you'll see this is where we bring in money from reserves. So that $1.2 million is carry forward money that we bring forward from one budget to the next. We're using $600,000 from the Marcelino and Levine aid grants. So that's what I talked to you about before. So last year was the year before last, it was $1 million. This last year, for this current fiscal year, there's $800,000 coming in from those reserves. Next year, we're planning for $600,000 in reserves. And you'll see once all of these documents get posted to the website, you'll be able to see the planned use of them until they're gone. And then interfund transfer monies are monies that that's the ERS reserve. And so that totals $88 million in revenues. So where we are right now is if we wanted to present a budget that was tax cap compliant, we would be able to ask for a levy of $88,411,974.21 at 2.701% increase. We're actually right now at a little bit below that. And so the total tax levy that we are proposing is 2.630, and that's $61,000 under the allowable cap. And so that is our starting point, and then we will go from there. I went through all this. So those are our split properties, our pilots. So pilots stand for, I wish I had a little prize. Anybody know what pilot stands for? Payment in lieu of taxes. They are like a 4-letter word. And so that's where some revenue comes in from. State aid, miscellaneous revenues, that's a whole conglomeration of things, right? So adult ed fees, tuition-related services, the St. Christopher reimbursement that I talked to you about before, income that we get from interest, And our treasurer is very aggressive about threatening to take our money in other places if they don't give us higher interest rates, so that helps us a little bit. And then I talked to you about fund balance, and I talked to you about the levy. So that is how it all comes in. What do we have going here? So the challenges are, so we've talked about it quite a bit of this, right? So the challenges are the tax cap set at 2%, inflation grew at 2.25%, so it's not necessarily on pace with where inflation is, and then there's an adjustment. So North Shore's adjustment is 2.7. 2.701, because once you take out some exceptions out of that. We continue to struggle with the reduction in assessment and the shift of the tax burden from LIPA to our taxpayers, right? So that is ongoing, and we monitor that case very, very carefully to see what is going to happen with that. State aid is really hard to predict. And fund balance is something we really pay attention to, how to bring that money over. So we start really watching that very, very carefully. Olivia's pretty much watching it all year. But right around this, I'd say January, we start to really zero in on where is the spending and where do we need to start making some decisions. I'm not going to take you through all this. This will all be on the website, but you'll see in 14-15 we started using the Marcelino grant at 169,000. It spiked in 17-18. We're starting to bring it down. We plan to use the entirety of that reserve by 2025-26. And these are all done year by year. These can certainly change at the board's discretion, but that is the planned use of the reserve for now. So when you come back and you see me next year, you'll see that $600,000 line will become $400,000. So that's just a visual, another way to look at it. I don't have to explain my ICE to you because I gave that away before, but it is absolutely true, and how I've lived by building budgets as a superintendent for many years. Okay, so a bunch of years ago there was a tax certiorari reserve. We were told we aren't allowed to have a tax certiorari reserve, so that is being spent down as well. And so you'll see over the course of several years, that's going to remain at 500. Our plan is to use that at $500,000 for the next couple of years, and then start to bring that down. That had to do with LIPA. So we've gotten some advice on put some money aside just in case there's a tax certiorari claim with regard to LIPA and the power plant, and so the board did that and continues to use that to offset the levy. And then lastly, or again, almost lastly, is how are taxes apportioned in Nassau County. So Nassau County has a very complicated way that it collects taxes. There are 4 classes. If you are a single-family homeowner, you are in Class 1, and you will see that that's pretty much the largest class within the county. Class 2 are co-ops and condos. Class 3 are utilities, and Class 4 are the commercial properties. So some of the taxation issues that the community is facing right now have to do with how this is built. So LIPA and New York American Water sit in Class 3. So when the Public Service Commission allowed the reduction reduced it for LIPA in the assessment for New York American Water, it shifted within that class to New York American Water. So the water, you have to think of water that's always going to seek an equal level, right? You can pour it wherever you want to pour it, it's always going to seek an equal level. So the county guarantees 100% of our taxes. So we put out a budget, community approves whatever number they approve. We then send that to the county then sends us back that exact dollar. Not 1 penny more or 1 penny less. If we ask for $80 million, we get a check for $80 million. There are some restrictions about what percentage things can move in and among those, but class 1 is where most of our folks are. The averaging, the spending proposal we have, the average increase by home based on the proposed budget is $417 for the year. If you don't live in the average home, then it'll be lower. If you live in a more expensive home, it will be higher. And for class 2 co-ops and condos, the average increase by home is $1,155. This has all to do with these base proportion numbers, right? Just the amount of the percentage of who gets to pay what in which class. Okay, and then this here is the impact on home values in the district. So if you live in a full value home, $500,000, you could expect the annual increase to your taxes to be approximately $395. If you live in a home that is full value $1.5 million, you could expect your taxes to go up approximately $1,186 over the year. Okay, this is an average, so it really depends on, a lot depends on assessments. Okay, and then the last component of where we are tonight is we did a transportation study, so we have been very gradually and carefully reducing our transportation limits so we can get more kids on buses. We have looked at, and we're going to talk about this through our line by line a little bit, but we are proposing that we can decrease 612 from 1 mile to 3/4 of a mile at no cost to the district. Okay, so that would be K through 12, all 3/4 of a mile. We did look at, because the ridership at elementary is much higher than it is at middle school, high school. We looked at, can we make it a half a mile for elementary kids, and we would have had to add routes, and that would have added cost. So the funny thing about transportation is if you are, even if it's going to cost you less, if you change your mileage limits, it requires voter approval. So this will be the 3rd year in a row that we're asking the community to vote on whether or not we are allowed to reduce the limit from a mile to 3/4 of a mile for elementary. Okay, does that make sense? So if the vote is no, then it stays at 1 mile. If the vote is yes, then it is 3/4 of a mile. Okay. That's all. Okay, so. Board, any questions, comments? Should we get right to the work?
I'm sure we do. Trustees, can we have your questions and comments on the presentation? And then we'll move on to some more detail. Anybody?
I have a couple comments.
Please.
Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate how you tied how we're spending money to both the goals of the district and how it ends up actually affecting students. I think is very important. One point that I think you spoke about is the 2% tax cap, and the way you presented it was that it's this inviolable number, which I think is the way we view it. But I think it's also important to realize that number can be crossed by a 60% community vote. So when people talk about this limit as if it's something we simply can't do, we could do it. And so I think that it certainly is not something this community has done, or something I think this board has had to do in a very long time. But I think it does help put it in perspective in terms of what the potential spending could be.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we'll look at in this book is the history of tax raises.
Mm-hmm.
There were numbers like 10%, 12%, 8% for decades. And that slowly has gone down. And now 3% is a number I haven't even seen crossed, even within the tax limit, 2% tax limit cap in a very long time. So I think that's important to mention also.
And that's true, right? So for those who are not aware of how that works, right? So if you are within the allowable tax cap, whether that is 2% or higher or lower, that you need a majority plus one, 50% plus one vote to for the budget to pass. If you exceed that tax cap limit by even a single dollar, then you need a supermajority. So you need 60% of the voters to approve the budget. Those, if you look across the state every year, those budgets have, since the inception of the cap, budgets have, the passage rates of budgets are much higher across the state. It's actually very popular legislation with voters. Where you see budgets fail in most circumstances is when folks are exceeding the cap.
I was going
Or
to say
attempting
too,
to.
I thought, and to that point, I thought you made an interesting point that like, if you just carried over this year's budget to next year, you'd be above the cap. So we're in the ironic position of the budget's going up, but we still obviously are making cuts in some areas to accommodate the places where we don't have any control. And I think that's been true since the tax cap that we've talked about. Cuts after cuts after cuts in lots of small places in the budget to accommodate these huge drivers, which are sometimes the state pension costs, sometimes it's healthcare, sometimes it's contractual, but it is always something.
Yeah, the number is, that of the 2.93 million that we're increasing, 1.67 of it is just contractually obligated. So there's no flexibility there. So all the other things, the health and wellness, the coding, all the classes that we talk about, the security implementations that the community requires or has listed and shown us as a priority, is all in a very small wedge that you have to fit in. 43% of that increase has to fit all of those things. So we'll certainly talk about every line and go through it, but good shoehorning so far of how to get it in there.
Thank you. It's
Yeah,
kind of a good team.
absolutely. Anybody else, questions or comments here? I can't see Tim. Okay. There? Okay, so, what's scheduled next is comments from the public. What does not appear on the agenda, so I'm gonna make a motion, to amend the agenda is we did not specifically slate in the time at which we would do the line-by-line portion of the first few sections of the budget. You guys are welcome, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but it wasn't on the agenda. I didn't know we were doing line by line tonight.
It's not on the agenda, you're right. It's in the,
It was in my
board
letter.
update, and it's in the, budget calendar that's in the front of the budget books, which the board update referred to. February 7th is sections. My motion then will be to amend the agenda to put the line-by-line items directly after comments from the public. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments? All in favor of amending the agenda? All right, thank you.
Thank you. We'll make sure the agendas have these all spelled out on them moving forward.
The motion's passed, so next up will be comments from the public, after which we will go to, the board will have a detailed discussion of the first few sections of the budget. If anyone would like to share their thoughts or comments with the board, if you would kindly approach the podium, we will need your name and your town of residence, and we welcome your comments. We're happy to hear from you.
Hi. Melissa August, Glen Head. Hold on. All right. Okay, so I was going to tout our virtues even before I saw all the new scholastic opportunities in this budget. Now this is even going to be better. Okay, so, dear members of the board and fellow neighbors, it's come to my attention that there's been some tension between the board and some members of our community, and I'd like to take this opportunity to say here for the record that not only do I, but many others in the community support this board. We support our school, its teachers, and its staff. We don't offer this support based on blind faith loyalty, but because we see the big picture. Because we know our children are receiving a whole child education and are successful not just because of their test and ranking scores, but because of their abilities to function successfully in the world. We support you because we trust you with our children, and we trust you are making the best decisions for their future. If you judge a school system on the state-mandated test scores alone, we fare well, but no, not at the top. If you judge it by the caliber of the human beings being sent out into the world, by the support system it provides those in physical, mental, and emotional need, by the whole child approach to teaching, by the electives offered to make our children more well-rounded, by the clubs and after-school activities offered which keep our children engaged, off video games, and out of trouble, then the North Shore School District ranks very high, in my opinion. Okay. We also support you because we know that the school is this community's lifeblood and its biggest asset. Our school is the largest employer in our community. Without its fine reputation and award-winning stature, people would not move here. It raises the values of our homes as well as the value of our community. The reason people are willing to endure that excruciating train line is because of this school. The school and the people who move here for it support our local restaurants and businesses. My goodness, have you been to Gemelli's at lunchtime? It's teachers and students as far as the eye can see. And Lord knows it's our kids who are keeping Fairy Light Mothers in business. Okay. Our school does all of this because of the monies, time, and attention we dedicate to it. I believe that in order to keep all of this going, we must allow the board to make the right decisions. We must trust them and support them. We must vote for them and for the budget so that they have the resources to keep our children and our community thriving. These budgets, where the money is going and why, is public information. We as a community have voted on these budgets and they passed. The majority of the community declared by vote that we are comfortable with the school having monies in reserve to stave off future emergencies, attract the best personnel, and to put air conditioning in so that no more elementary school children faint during the spring concert. But I understand that some don't see it this way. Some believe our taxes and budgets are being mishandled. The basis of these concerns seems to be the perceived lack of transparency by the board, and I get it. Even though everything is printed on the school website and our board meeting videos are posted, it's really complicated and complex. So perhaps it's not transparency so much as clarity and context. So I'd like to just spend a moment getting some facts clarified and putting them into context so that each one of us has the proper information with which to make informed decisions on the upcoming budget vote and the Board of Ed election. Just two quick things, sort of quick. In regard to the monies we have in reserves and how they compare, I believe we have these reserves to best manage our risk, to keep our long-term borrowing rates lower because we are on such solid ground, which saves us money. In regard to the Manhasset comparison specifically, it's my understanding that Manhasset has much lower reserves, and because of it, has a much higher fiscal stress score from the state comptroller. which leaves them with a much higher borrowing costs and are much more susceptible to problems if they have big issues such as a failed roof or employee retirement reserve shortfall. I am personally grateful for our secure finances. Am I misunderstanding any of this? In regard to the monies we spend on our children and our schools, the district expenditures appear to be consistent with those of other Nassau County schools with similar academic achievements. Our return on investment is very good, with grade 3 through 8 ELA and math scores showing incredible increases over the past few years and corresponding strength in AP, IB participation, graduations with Regents distinction, and SAT, ACT performances. In regard to other schools' spending comparison specifically, how do they manage to spend less? I'd like to point out that many have more building infrastructures than we have. We have 5, which means that our infrastructures will cost more to maintain. We have smaller classrooms, more teachers with higher degrees, and a world language program that starts in kindergarten, none of which I'm personally willing to give up. Okay, so that's it. I just want to say thank you. And finally, once again, I'm proud to be a North Shore parent, and I believe my children are in good hands.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It looks like we have additional comments from the public. Could we have your name and town of residence?
Tony Labate, Glen Head. I want you to know that when you said motion before, I actually said motion. I apologize. It was all those years doing that, it just came out of my mouth, so I apologize for that. But, okay, so I just wanted to add a couple of things. Thank you, Peter, for the presentation. It was excellent. Although I've heard this many, many years, it's always, I always learn something else. I know that everybody in the room always learns something else when we go through these pieces, so thank you. 2 things I wanted to point out. When you talked about the reserves and funding our reserves, I can tell you from my experience in being on the board for 6 years and interacting with our attorneys and our accountants, it has always been recommended by our attorneys and our accountants to fund our reserves. And that's recommended by 2 different attorneys, 2 different law firms, because we have a different law firm over my tenure, and 2 different accounting firms that we've had over my tenure as well. So that's 4 separate professionals that know about this business that have recommended that we fund our reserves and how we fund them. This is not a decision that is solely made by these board members. They make the final decision, but that is recommended on expert advice and also the advice of Olivia Bawazzi, our Assistant Superintendent of Business, who has done this for many years and has a vast experience. And her experience also reaches out into her interactions with other districts and how she works with those other districts and learning about what they do in their schools, correct? So I just wanted to point that out. And is a result of all of our careful planning, right? When I sat on the board and when you all sit on the board, you do that because you're looking to the future. We don't just plan 1 year, and we plan many years ahead, and we do that because we have to. I just want to make a quick happy quote. I was very happy to see that you put coding in the middle school. Really, really thrilled about that.
For everybody.
So wait, but how are those 8th graders going to code if they don't have Chromebooks? I'll leave that to you. I'm just pointing it out. You'll work it out. I don't know how I don't know how to code. So maybe they code on something else.
I don't either.
So I don't know. I think it's a valid question. I don't need an answer right now, but that's it. And
There are programs that they use.
Okay.
I know this. There are programs like Scratch, and you probably can answer this.
You
better
can't do
than I
Scratch
can.
on an iPad. No, you're absolutely.
You can.
There are plenty of drag and drop kinds of programming on iPads.
Mhm.
Right, if you were doing text-based coding, but kids often start with the drag and drop stuff. If you're doing text-based, you'd probably be better off with a Chromebook, but it's not like you don't have computer
Correct.
labs anywhere
True, true.
in the middle school.
True, true, true. And I think that was it. So I thank you all. I thank you for your dedication, all of you. I know what it is to do it. It's not always easy. People aren't always fair. But I will reiterate how I felt when I sat on the board. If somebody has a complaint or they have a comment, they should come to this board meeting and make that complaint or comment, not put it on social media and cause a social media storm that embarrasses people and is frankly unfair. You sit behind your keyboard and you write all this garbage about people, and there's no accountability. Come here and be accountable. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board? They can be, simple. Please, thank you. Name and town of residence.
I never come intending to comment, and then I always find something I have to say. Maria Mosca from Seacliff.
I had that experience. You see what happened.
It's your fault I'm here anyway, Sarah, so just kidding. I couldn't agree more with both previous speakers. Absolutely, 1,000%. Love, love, love everything that's happening in this room. Tony specifically mentioned being delighted about coding. I'm delighted about it in 8th grade. Not really worried about the kids having access to computers. Some of you may know that I'm the manager of the Seacliff Garden. So I'm a big, big proponent of the kids being outside as much as possible. So my comment, and I also have a 3rd grader in Seacliff School. So my comment does have to do with the Chromebooks. In 5th grade, there's been a rumor flying around that there's a movement to have them be in 4th grade, and I would love to say I really am opposed to that. I would like my daughter, who I'm already fighting with, I'm the garden manager, she really doesn't want anything to do with the garden. It's probably just because I'm the garden manager. I think she secretly loves getting in the dirt, but she won't do it because mommy likes it. But I don't need any more. I don't need school encouraging her to look at a screen anymore. I'm not worried. She's 9 years old. They have plenty of time to learn. We can wait until 8th if we sign that pledge for cell phones. We can wait until 5th for Chromebooks. Thank you.
Thank you. Floor is still open. Okay. Yes, no, please.
Good evening. Hi, I'm Wesley Leach, Seacliff. Just one question with the budget that's coming up with the security. The people that are, the guys that are coming in from 4 to 6, are they part-time? Is this how we're getting by? We're not paying them for full-time?
No, not necessarily. So if to the extent that we can employ full-time people, we are, but we do piece together the holes with part-time hourly people.
Well, why are we picking from 4 to 6 only? Why can't we get somebody else in full-time during the day to have a second person there, security in all the buildings?
Oh, we're working on that. So that's in our proposal. So we have so we've extended the day from 4 to 6 for the desk coverage, and then we're adding a second person that's being recruited now to be outside and floating around the building. So there will be 2.
Okay.
2
Okay.
full-time people.
All right, thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, it was very interesting to see what was added for security for next year.
Denise, I'm so sorry. Would you-
Denise Reiner,
Thank you.
Old Brookville. The new added security hours and the new personnel that will be there outside for events and are these, what kind of security is this? Are they armed? Are they non-armed? Is it the regular people that we have standing by and just making sure that if there's a ruckus, they can stop the ruckus? What kind of security are we talking about?
Please, thank you.
So nobody's armed. We generally hire retired law enforcement officers, and so they will be. That's who we're planning to hire. We talked a few board meetings ago about the whether or not we would go through a contracted service or we'd hire our own people, and so we want to be able to have more control over our personnel. So we're going to bring those people into our own employee rather than contract that out. But they will be, in part walking around and making sure everybody is, like managing the perimeter of the exteriors of the buildings. They may be in when we have indoor recess, we need someone at the door all day long, but they'll be managing some of those spaces, being a presence in and among the building. In the afternoon, particularly at the secondary level, we have lots of stuff going on the athletic fields, so we want to make sure that the exteriors are covered so coaches can focus on coaching and kids can play, and we're paying attention to what is in the surrounding stuff.
And has
Does that make sense?
there's been discussion about, there are some individuals in the community that would like the location for the budget vote moved. Has the board made any decisions or moved either way with that discussion?
Yeah, I can answer it, sure. The board had discussion at the last meeting that was fairly robust. A number of board members discussed why they felt that our election should remain at the high school. But the board's not had
A
any
decision?
votes
Okay.
on it.
Then I'd just like to read a little statement. And please understand that I'm 100% concerned for the safety of our students. Concerts, plays, daily athletic practice, athletic events that we host, evening meetings, continuing adult education classes, Board of Education meetings, homecoming, graduations, 24-hour access to our parking lots and athletic fields. The list can continue. These are examples of the times that public access without identification of attendees takes place in our district. Some of these events include attendance by hundreds of unknown individuals. Unless access requirements and monitoring will change for all of the opportunities that take place frequently in our district, it makes sense to me that for this one day, our budget vote day, we make some easy adjustments to make our environment safer for our students. It's my recommendation that we decrease the chaos of this day. First, ensure that the voting area does indeed have only one-way access in and out, and that the area is designated solely for voting purposes. Ensure that students, instead of attending gym that day, spend the period in assemblies that are crafted to educate our students in areas of health, nutrition, athletic training, or whatever the athletic director finds most appropriate. Move the student awards night to a different night. Move the celebration of student achievement that is displayed in the cafeteria to another day and evening. Some parents and students enter the voting area through the cafeteria doors that lead to the gym after viewing the display. I ask for the board to take to task other safety issues that can affect our students both physically and emotionally daily. Some of these have been identified. Please make the easy changes expeditiously and commit other precious time making changes where the absolute risk is significant and the most measurable good can come from necessary changes in policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Public comment? Okay, we're going to move on with the agenda then. Thank you all for your comments. We appreciate your time. Next on the agenda then is the detailed discussion of the first few sections of the budget. Dr. Gianluca, if you would lead us in budget codes.
Be happy to.
Great, it was so fun.
Okay, so we're going to start. With enrollment projections for next year. That's on section C1 and C2 of your budget books.
And now we all go on a table that's like twice as big.
I know. I apologize. Okay. So we're looking at page 1 of 87 and 2 of 87. Okay. So where we are with enrollment, we just commissioned a demographic study, and we have that back, and we've projected out section counts for next year. Our sections, as you know, they tend to be fairly stable year on year. We don't get a lot of ins and outs. And so this year, as you know, we have 2 sections in Glen Head, 4 sections in Glenwood Landing, and 3 sections in Seacliff in kindergarten. The Seacliff sections dropped precipitously over from the last week in August until the opening of school, and once those classes were built, we didn't think it was appropriate to collapse them, and some of this happened after school had started. So we are keeping the sections of 2 for Glen Head, 43 students, and there are an exact number of 43 students at Seacliff, and so that section count will drop from 3 to 2 in the upcoming school year. And what we've decided to do is to accommodate the uptick in size from 14 to 21 is we're adding a full-time teaching assistant to support those sections. So it'll be first grade, K to 1. Okay, and then we're projecting 3 sections in each of the 3 elementary schools for next year. That could definitely change. As of the other day, so the enrollments, we don't have, the other day doesn't matter, but as of the enrollment, the demographic report is projecting 51 students at Glen Head for next year, 60 at Glenwood Landing, and 47 at Seacliff. So they are all, if that holds, those are 3 in each section, and 21 students are, as I look through, that happens from time to time. Okay. So outside of that, there are no anticipated enrollment changes. We will be down one full section at Glenwood Landing, because there are 4 sections of 5th grade leaving, and we're anticipating 3 coming in. And we'll be down 1 section at Seacliff because of that enrollment, but and we'll keep an eye on that. Okay. For middle school and high school, those section counts are still very fluid at this point in time. But you saw from the budget presentation where we are with regard to program recommendations for next year, and the total staffing for. So if you look at the enrollment numbers for middle school, they're projected at 590, and high school 851. So in that demographic study, we see that, and we should talk. We'll have to figure out a time when we want to talk about this a little bit more, right? But over the long term of demography, the enrollment stays reasonably flat over the course of 10 years.
But and then the piece we're missing too is that capacity study.
Correct. And so that's a good point. So the capacity study, so in addition to the demographic study, which is somewhat of an, I don't want to say it's inaccurate science, but it's not an exacting science. We look at live birth, and we look at, but a lot of our families don't deliver their children here, they deliver them somewhere else. So when we, for example, look at Seacliff live births in a certain year at 11579, that doesn't tell us anything other than those are our lifers, right? Or people who are having multiple children. But we do get lots of kids who move out to be here. So, so what we are also doing right now is looking at in each school, in each space, how are we using that space, and do our schools have the capacity over the course of an extended period of time, 5 to 10 years, to meet the needs of enrollment that are projected.
Right, not just in terms of number of children, but in terms of what you want to do with the children. You want to teach them a foreign language, you want them to
Yeah.
learn an instrument, you want them to
And
do things
physical.
that need spaces.
And physical space. So for example, last time when
Indoor
we talked
recess.
about, exactly. So last time when we talked about how we use space at the middle school, we know that a typical classroom requires, it's 800 square feet of space. A home and family and consumer science room requires 1,200 square feet of space. So
By
then,
law,
by law.
even, yeah.
So just to clarify, we had, for those of who are long-term board watchers, I've been on here for about 2.5 years or so. There was an initial demographic study that we had commissioned that talked about certain rates that never really sat right with this board. As such, we asked for a revision of that study, which basically cut their projections in half. They were still holding to their guns, so we felt with the potential of an upcoming bond that we would commission a new demographic study through BOCES. And I was going to bring that up in new business, but we're talking about it right now. So I'd like to schedule in the future a presentation of that more fully and have a discussion about it, because as you said, the numbers went from we're going down less to now we're flat. I'd like to have a little more thorough discussion about that.
That's great.
I would too, yeah.
Yeah, they
There are things, there are methodologies, even in the study that we have, that make you scratch your head.
Yeah, Lisa knows we've, through our other hats we
Yeah.
wear, there's a potential 60-unit condo going in the Glenwood
Oh.
Landing area. There's other properties being developed. Those really just aren't
By the
taken into
water
account.
tower in Glen Head is where
Yeah, the
houses
Lundy
and
property,
condos are going in.
so I just think a little bit more robust discussion is needed.
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions on enrollment?
I've got a comment. Back in September, we had parents here from Glen Head who were concerned about their class size, and I had raised I had requested that at some point we have a discussion looking at attendance zones, school attendance zones, as a way of perhaps giving parents options, because I'm just looking at the numbers you're saying for kindergarten, and that's going to be very much imbalanced. And I'm seeing that in the first grade as well, the way it's set up at this particular point, and I'm anticipating that we're going to be hearing the same thing during this process, and also in August and September once again. And so I think I'd like to, anyway, schedule some sort of discussion and maybe see what policy is regarding attendance zones.
Yes.
How do you want to handle that? So
I-
our attendance.
I'm interested in looking at that. I think we need the enrollment and the capacity studies, and the whole board is welcome to chime in on this. Especially in conjunction with the pending development. I think all of this somehow comes together with, do we need different kinds of strategies?
So there are a couple of ways to address that, right? So we know we have a skeleton of some of those where some of those properties are. In some cases, there are solid plans, and in some cases there are not.
In some cases, right, it's just the looming threat of.
Right.
doom,
So like
but-
the May Knoll property that's for sale, that's in Roslyn Harbor. That's 8 acres of land. I don't quite know what's going to happen with that. Engineers has a plan.
Right. Would another golf club sell? We don't know.
Correct, we don't know, right? So there are two ways to think about this, right? So you could look at your hard lines that are drawn for catchment areas, right? So, and you could figure out we can think through how kids are distributed through those lines. People tend to feel pretty strongly about their neighborhood schools, right? So we'd want to, definitely consider that. We can also talk through if a family wants to move their student from Seacliff to Glenwood Landing, right? Because the class size is more, they consider the class size more favorable or whatever that might be, that they could make application to me and we can work through how that would work, and they'd have to transport their child from one place to the other. There are districts that do that, many.
Right, and that's more what I had
Right.
in mind when I,
Right.
and not changing the zoning.
Right.
Right.
So there are a lot of places that do that. We'd have to think through how, right now our policy doesn't really allow for it.
I mean, where is that? I haven't seen that.
It's-
That policy.
It's the policy is, actually the policy is almost silent on it, right? The practice has been, I shouldn't say policy, the lowercase policy, right, doesn't necessarily accommodate for it. We haven't done it. Where we have done it is if a sibling is in a special class, and then we allow the student to stay there. That's year on year. They have to make application every year. It can't lead to the creation of a new section. They have to transport themselves, and parents know that I write them when they make that application. So it's a risk that they take. But Glenwood Landing has probably the most flexibility because it's just big enough that it usually gets it usually has another section than the other schools. So we can talk through those things, and certainly I would be more than open to having those conversations with folks and making that more flexible. We just have to figure out how and when you wish to do that, and what kind of process we can have to make that happen.
I'm looking at the board. You guys are interested in discussing this?
I think it's a fair discussion to have in light of some of the concerns that have been raised. We would really have to have a detailed discussion, a detailed plan on deadlines and how that, it could be self-defeating. So if, 5 families from Glen Head decide they want to go to Glenwood Landing, well, that now they may be in a bigger class size if they go to Glenwood Landing than if they had stayed at Glen Head. And you'll have to, we'll have to take into account, staffing. I think it's, we have accommodated in the past where there's, a special education situation. And I think we're always willing to listen to where there should be an exception. I think it's going to be difficult to articulate a policy that may be workable, given the situation, given.
Policies we could look at.
We can look at it. I'm willing to have a discussion and look at it, but it's hard to wrap my head around.
I understand what Marianne's saying. Just I keep thinking of myself as a softball coach, and I don't care if I have like 10 teams, as long as they're all. The problem is when you have that 39, and it's like, do I have 4 teams of 10, or do I have 3 13s? And so you're always on that cusp. So last year at Seacliff, we had a huge number in kindergarten, kind of unprecedented, right? There was 70, and now this year is a low one. So it's not so much being able to manage the total number, it's being able to manage where the breakdown falls, and that's tricky to get to. But I do think that it's worthy of a discussion, certainly in concert with a capacity study, because Glenwood Landing has the most flexibility, has the largest range, typically has the largest enrollment per grade, but also is within the parameters of all these potential developments, engineers, Glen Harbor, Lundy's, et cetera. So to me, the capacity study, once we have that in hand, I think that would facilitate having that conversation.
You may have to, depending on what happens, really redraw the lines. as to what goes where, depending on what happens. And where if it's condos that are 55 and older, well, it doesn't matter, right? So it all depends on what gets developed, what the zonings are on those developments. All those, you're coming to an economy where they can't make up their mind whether to raise the interest rates or not. That will all affect housing. So there are a lot of different factors.
I agree. That's in the map, even
right.
at one point. And the point is, if you were going to, I was saying this to Peter a while ago, if you feel like you need to change those lines, the sooner you do it, the better, right? So
Right.
that when people buy something, move in, et cetera, you don't have to change their expectations after the fact.
Right.
That they know what they're dealing with. People do not like it when the school changes.
No, they don't. I mean, people, when I was first buying, oh my gosh, over 25 years ago, everyone wanted the Glenwood Landing School. And then it became the Glen Head School everyone wanted. So, and at the end of the day, they're all good elementary schools, right? And when my kids were going through, it didn't matter what school you were in, you were overcrowded. Except maybe Seacliff had the lowest enrollment. But it's just the way it kind of works. And they're all good. Really, it's more perception, I think, with parents than reality.
Right. If you're going to change the lines, change the lines. People choose.
So
what
they
wanna
know.
Choose, so they know. So that's part of it. All right. I
Okay.
believe it's going on the agenda when we have those pieces of information because we'd like to discuss it.
Sounds good. Okay.
Peter, can I ask one quick question?
Of course, yes.
In the enrollment, the 1920 enrollment grid, the special ed in district grades K through 1, is that not determined yet? Is that
So
the ILC?
that is the
section?
ILC. It is likely, we're at a bit of a space crunch at Glenwood Landing. And so there is, we're talking about possibly moving that to Seacliff, the ILC. There's more flexible space there. And so what,
In total? You mean the K through 5?
so we would phase it in,
Uh-huh.
right? So because we would bring the whole program over there,
Back.
to Seacliff. Yeah, Glenwood Landing is in a squeeze for classroom space. There are 27 sections, I think,
Wow.
right now. Okay. Okay. So my suggestion for the next piece of this is to go to the corresponding budget codes. So if we look at the general sport non-instructional codes, they're on the 1,000 budget lines. So if you turn to the tab of your, where it says Board of Education. Okay.
Which page are we on? Sure, got it.
See it?
Yep.
Okay, and then, so we put the narrative piece there if we need reference, but it's probably easier to go through the lines themselves. Okay. Everybody's there?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, the tab that says Board of Education. For you.
Are you kidding? We get triple. Yeah, well, we're making that, yeah.
It's 100% raise.
All right,
Okay.
I'll start with a question.
All right.
Do you have something to say, or we just?
Well, so last year, how we, just for process, right? So
Thank you,
last year,
yes.
when we handled this, we looked at the code sort of in the general. The board posed any questions that the board wanted to pose, and then if there were certain lines that we needed to speak to, Olivia and I can do that. The board, last year, the board did not want to go through, every single
Right, well-
solitary line, right?
We're looking at every line, but we're not gonna call out
Totally, yes. We're
10,
saying
10,
exactly.
40, 90. We're gonna say, we're in
That's-
this section and page, and people can yell out whichever budget codes. they're
That's exactly
interested
right. So this first page here, this 1010 through 1060 line, those are the board's codes. So that's what you fund for your council, for any consultants that you wish to bring in. So for example, the strategic plan, you use this code for a superintendent search at one point. There's professional development that the board attends. These are your memberships with New York school boards, with your notary fees, with your journals and publications. This is money for the LIPA hearing. We've reduced that. Go ahead.
So are we going to go through it line by line, or we're just going to let trustees pop in when they have questions?
Okay, I'll stop.
Because I
I'm
was
like
like,
my own
because-
worst enemy here, right?
I was like, 'cause, yeah.
Right, I'm doing exactly what I said I wasn't going to do.
You always have trouble not. But funny you should mention the LIPA hearing lines. Hilarious,
Can't help
really, I was up all night. All right, so we definitely have money out of that line. And in my mind, surely we can hope the LIPA thing comes to an end at some point, but I find it very hard to believe that our battles with various utilities will ever come to an end. So I was concerned about that cut.
Olivia, you've got your detail on this? Right, this was,
And then you'll see us doing this, because then we turn our book sideways, because we also have five-year expenditure reports, like we can look back 5 years. And so when I look back 5 years, I was like, we've never, we don't ever spend less than $213,000 on that code, and we've spent much higher, so I'm concerned.
right, that's not the,
Well, that was my point, that's what I said.
Yeah.
These are the words that came out of my mouth. I was
Yes.
like, yes, we believe LIPA will be wrapping up, but I feel skeptical that all utilities altogether we're wrapping up, and we don't have another line anyplace else where we're talking about what happens next with LIPA. National Grid wants to take more properties off the tax rolls. There are always going to be things because of the size of the classes.
There are always going to be
Taxpayers.
things, but actual litigation costs you a lot more than what you're talking about. And it's very difficult to determine what litigation will cost you. I generally start at the $100,000 mark and go up from there, honestly, for an actual litigation. Negotiating meetings, that doesn't run you what a litigation runs you.
I'm just looking at the actual expenditures. We haven't been this low in any of the numbers we have in any of our past history. But so you
Olivia,
guys
where
you
is,
have to think about that.
no, we don't. Where's the lobbyist money?
It's in that quota.
Right, that's what it is. So
You think that's the lobbyist, not actually,
correct.
Okay.
So there's, we are recommending that you don't need to spend all that money on a lobbyist as you move forward.
We don't
We
spend $315,000 on a lobbyist. That's not the lobbyist. The lobbyist,
She's talking about, you're talking about 1010-40790, am I right?
Yeah, Marian's saying.
Yeah,
right.
15,
but we didn't spend that on lobbyists, I'm telling
No,
you
no,
right
no, I
now.
know that.
that was
Yes, I know
litigation
that.
and lobbyist, but the lobbyist is in there. So you're saying the cut of 50 is due to a reduction in the lobbyist?
Correct.
okay.
So personally, I support that.
Yes, as do I.
Lobbyists don't run us $150,000 either.
50,000.
Right.
It's down 50,000.
Right, the cut's
Right.
the 50.
Okay, that's what that
Okay.
is.
That's hard, consultants? I don't even know where that line is. Okay. Other questions on, questions, comments, theories on the Board of Education page? We're losing people. Come up with something good.
Okay, so in total, this budget, this line is down 58,000 983. Okay? Yes? Okay, so if you look at page 2, this is the superintendent's office. This is the business official, the business office. Those two things. Any questions?
Any questions?
I had questions just on 1240, sorry, I'm just going to use the words, not the numbers. Superintendent's office salaries and business
Yes.
office clerical salaries, which are not you and Olivia, but the people in the offices. I realize those are up. We've obviously had increases. Is that additional personnel changes, or is that just salary lines for the folks we have in place?
Salary lines for the folks we have in place.
Okay, thank you.
Central admin?
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so if we turn to central
Not an
services,
exciting
this is not the most exciting part of your budget, right?
Let's find something good.
Public information is in here, and our BOCES services are in here. Okay? Okay, and if you look at page 5 of the budget, now we get into central services, facilities, and operations. And so these are all of our custodians, custodial overtime, security services, you'll see at the bottom there.
The last line on the page is a big increase. That's due to the security increases you talked about?
Absolutely, yes.
So that's again, that's $1 evidence of commitment to increases in security that we're putting in there.
$264,000 just in people, in
Yep.
personnel, yes.
Okay.
You don't have a book? I'll get you a book.
So I had
Look, Rob's not here. You can come look at our book.
a general, are we just jumping in? So there's a lot of, can I,
Please, yes.
okay. Sorry, Olivia, I know you're about to give away your Bible. But there's a lot of lines here, 16, 20, a lot of the supplies here. I just noticed as a trend, we went down in 18, 19 from the year before, and now we're kind of going back up again. Is that a every other year kind of plan on spending things, or is it just we cut a cut and it wasn't enough? Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 I was just saying, I noticed as a trend, if you look at, page 7, page 8, we went pretty significantly down from 17, 18 to this year, and now we're going pretty universally up again. It's a pretty solid V in the chart, and so, I'm not sure if that's, I mean, certainly certain rugs need to be replaced. On the other hand, for a lot of these, like we all know in our homes, you could let the rug, maybe, things are crises and then things are routine maintenance. It seems like in general we're going up in a lot of these this year. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
This is also where we're seeing, in the special projects, is where we're seeing the 21st century learning spaces you addressed
Absolutely,
in your
yep.
overview. Significantly, the softball field gets renovated, which
Right.
is enormous, right.
I should have talked about that in the slides.
We'll let you do it again.
Okay. And that's also, if you look at page 11 there, all those special projects, right? So you've got the 21st century learning spaces in each school. There's a audio system upgrade in the auditorium at Glenwood Landing that's in there. We've got the middle school softball field renovation in there. We have the high school main entrance landscape renovation budgeted for.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And
Right
our
there.
architectural and engineering fees,
Well, we got it.
Okay,
okay?
great.
And then all of our
Like that.
telephone services, and this is all John Hall's maintenance and contract roads.
I want to point out, I'm quite excited to see we will continue to sample for lead. Thank you.
You're welcome. And there's also tree pruning in here that we've gotten ourselves on a
That's great.
cycle for
With, to
right,
maintain that.
maintenance and removal and replacement.
Yes. Do we want to talk at all about what's going on with our wireless? This is actually the BOCES and the voice and data more than the wireless stuff, but never mind.
So you're talking about the cabling?
I
And the
was,
wiring?
but that's
Okay.
going to happen.
That'll be in
I-
the technology
Right, I'm not in
budget.
the right section yet,
Yep.
so.
Okay. A lot of money in here, but it costs a lot of money to run the plants.
And the security here,
The security is-
cabling, camera
yes.
monitoring,
Yes,
Yeah.
Yep.
that's all.
And so, we knew last year when we knew that we had this was an area of growth for us. And we did what we could through fund balance last year, and this year we made a concerted effort to make sure that
that,
we.
it should be budgeted so we know what we're getting into, but it's a direct correlation, so
Yep,
A to B.
yep.
Right, right, you're exactly right. There's like 116,000, you're saying, on the BOCES with the cameras and the cabling and the access.
Right.
Any other questions anywhere in central services? I think they're good.
Okay.
In my mind, that included plant maintenance, but we can certainly discuss that separately. I'm not sure if there's any real, that's a
No.
very straightforward, not big
Yes.
section.
Okay?
Yep.
All right. And then, this is the last one for the 1000s.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is our commercial insurance and BOCES administration, so our unallocated insurance, contract services for the split properties, and some BOCES administration expenses. Altogether, it amounts to quite a bit of money, but the insurances are vital.
It's very straightforward, it is, right, but it is. Questions, anybody? No? Okay.
Okay, very good. So that concludes so congratulations, you've gotten through all the 1000s of the budget, including the facilities, 1620 to 1670, and we did the special projects of the only section we have left for this evening is the 5510s to 5580s, that's transportation.
Okay. I'll kick off transportation with, could we talk about for the buses, I assume it's in this section, about the cards and the card readers for the buses?
Sure, Olivia, would you mind?
Yes, that is, that's on page 45.
That's that Zonar system?
Yeah.
And what's driving that need?
It's all tied to security that we agreed with the district. The idea is that sometimes, and most times, the first level of security has to be when the kids get into the bus. Sometimes we don't know if the driver is new on that route, he doesn't know the kids on the bus. But if you have a system in place that tracks the kids right from the time that they get into the bus to when they get in, we'll be able to know what is going on. So
Are we, are we concerned about something in particular?
No, we are not concerned about anything, but it's all tied into the improvement in security.
It's, yeah, and it's like an electronic bus pass. And so kids will come on, we know who they are, it helps us study ridership a little bit more carefully. It helps us to target, where kids are on, where kids are off. If we want to make future enhancements to the way that we, with routes, it could help us with routes.
We were
And-
talking universally, right? Like you're talking about kindergartners, 12th graders, everybody? Are there other districts that are doing this with elementary age kids?
Yes, I think the Robin is doing something similar to that. But I'll find out more and share it with you.
Are we going to talk about the transportation study here, or are we doing that separately?
The ridership study,
Yes,
we can do that here, sure.
because
We'll have to vote, to get it on the
Right.
ballot, but.
I just didn't know if we were going to do it,
Whatever
put
you
it
prefer.
together,
Uh-huh.
or if,
Yeah, we can do
it
that
kind
here.
of makes sense to do it now, right?
Yes,
Okay.
do it.
Okay, so can we make a motion to discuss the bus ridership study?
Second.
Uh,
I don't
all
know
in
if we need
favor?
to, but let's do it, yeah, just to be clear.
So, one of the things that interested me about the bus transportation study, the ridership, is that we really get the most ridership at the elementary level. And some of the things we've been discussing in the bond steering committee is the traffic at Glen Head and the conditions with leaving students off, the difficulty in all of the elementary schools for a pickup, especially on inclement days, to get, at Glen Head and at Glenwood Landing, you would have to park blocks away and then walk in, get your child, pick it up, and it creates a traffic jam. I'm just wondering if we did the cost of what it would cost us to buy the additional buses, if we decrease the mileage and the drivers, as to opposed to some of the proposals that were presented to us in bond steering about infrastructure, about expanding things like the Glen Head parking lot, which is a huge expense that gets put off every time we do a budget. We do a bond, excuse me. There was some request for a place for students to line up, or parents line up in foul weather to pick up their children. If you think about the cost of what it would do us, or what it would cost the district, as opposed to putting more students on the bus to alleviate those conditions, I think it's something, maybe we can't do it this year because it's a little late into the game, but I think we should really look at the cost-benefit analysis, not just a dollar analysis of, oh my gosh, we gotta buy 5 more buses. And the traffic and the safety of the students, especially if have a card reader for the bus, whereas, listen, some days you could pick up anyone's kid when you go to pick up a kid. I mean, it's hard for the teachers and the monitors to see where every child is going and who's going with every child. I think it's a safety issue as well. If you increase the ridership on the if you decrease the mileage to increase the number of students who are driven to school on a secure bus, as opposed to being dropped off and picked up. Just a thought.
It's an interesting theory, right? Because, and the reason we tried to look at that like half mile in the K to 5 is that you can imagine a high schooler working 3/4 a mile, but, it becomes less likely when you're talking about tiny children. I mean, there's certainly we know there's safety, environmental trade-offs that are hard to quantify. But yeah, if we're looking at a hard cost of like where you have to do some serious infrastructure, that's another way to look at it.
And maybe more cost efficient
Yep, it could
and
very well
safer,
be. Yep. could
if
very
you
well
think
be.
about it.
We could do- That's easy for us to, well, there are a couple of things we'd have to, just think through as we do that. One of them is, what is the cost? Secondly is, do we have the capacity to store the buses? right? 'Cause
Right.
That's also,
Okay, that's fair too.
that's also an issue for us, right? So,
Keep it in my house, it's fine.
so that's something, we just have to figure out where, if we were gonna add buses, where we could put them, right? Because that's the primary issue with not doing, so part of the issue with not capturing more of the private school routes as well. We just don't have enough buses at the
Like even space for buses,
right
you're
periods
saying.
of time, right, exactly. So let us do some analysis of, we probably won't be able to make it
You won't do,
happen
you
for-
won't, we
for
won't be
now.
able to do it this year because you wouldn't have planned for that expense
Yep.
of purchasing the buses. So it would, but, I mean, when the discussion about decreasing the mileage and increasing ridership, I think Michael Nightingale and I brought that up our first years on the board, that's 6 years ago.
Yep.
So every year, when I bring this up, for the past several years, we've decreased the mileage and increased the ridership, potential ridership, right? So, I think we've seen a benefit to that, and we should continue to always analyze it and continue the trend if possible. So if it's not this year, if it's next year, I mean, it's taken us 6 years to get here, so.
And we've taken,
what is the cost? Right, that's
Right.
gonna be the issue.
and so we wanted to really go, obviously Dr. Melnick started this, and, it was wise to go at this from a measured place, right? So you just sort of incrementally, reduce your limits, so like, as you, check as we do these ridership studies, we're not getting to a place where we exceed our capacity to transport kids, because we do it in an incremental way.
Right, and it could depend also on the demographic study, right? Because, if you get a blip of kids coming in, you may not be able to sustain a 0.5. I mean, all that has to be taken into account, but when I hear of, when I look at the cost of increasing the size of the Glen Head parking lot to alleviate that really terrible situation,
Yeah.
that's far greater than our purchasing buses and putting drivers in place. And it's a much safer alternative.
Yep. Yes?
Other questions on transportation? It's a big line, the increases.
So, just before we get to the lines, if I could ask the board, the mileage reduction is, obviously you'll have to vote on this as we do the
In a
propositions.
timely fashion to put it on the ballot
Absolutely.
in 2 languages.
So if there's any, go ahead.
I just, seems like a no-brainer, so let's get it on the next agenda.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask, right, so,
Does anyone have any concerns about
I mean, just to
reducing?
say it out loud,
612
the
to
buses on the
312?
elementary level are close to 70%. It's fantastic. We're not sending around these empty tin cans filled with gas. We are nowhere near there on the other levels, so let's get more of those older kids on the buses.
When is the last date to put a proposition on the ballot? Do we know?
not offhand. Not offhand. I can find out. Is March. Right. Yeah. So, probably end of March.
Okay.
We're good.
Okay. Thank you very much. So transportation, are there any questions on those lines?
I don't have any questions, but just, I guess, a comment. I see how these pieces fit together, that we have a lot more of our own drivers we're paying and less of the BOCES.
Yes.
So that's a shift to our own folks, there's a lot of moving pieces here, but the end result is we're getting more and it's efficient, so I think it's well done there by Michelle. The ridership study was well done by Michelle. So it's good. The field trip number, I wasn't sure, that was a little spiky. 5510, 40660.
5510.
I know there were questions by a lot of the middle school parents about Greenkill, and I'm not sure that really applies here because that's an outside contracted
That is
field
really
trip bus.
spiky.
But that added a lot to that cost last year. I wasn't sure if that's part of this or not part of this, or, It's non-instructional, it's not part of this. Great. Great, then I'm satisfied.
Even with the spikiness? I'm like, okay. I think they're good.
Okay, very good. So that essentially concludes our review of the budget tonight. The next time we meet, we will go through instruction, special education, technology. We have a heavy lift the next time. If what's helpful to Olivia and to me as we go through this is that as the board has suggestions or edits, please get them to us, either in the moment and we can rework things, or at the next meeting. Just because we, did it tonight doesn't mean we can't ever come back to it. So if something occurs to you, just let us know. But we will.
And thank you for I think the way this is set up, where we've got the good, solid break between this meeting and the next to get through the heavy sections
Yep.
will be very helpful.
Is it unreasonable to ask that maybe we put together a Google document for this, for the board's use? Because what if we're asking the same questions, or?
Assuming that we didn't get to that, but I have a plan for that.
Okay.
So yes.
Could we have copies of the budget for the public?
Mhm.
So they can follow
Sure,
along?
we don't?
We should
And-
have them here at the meeting.
Yeah.
So
Put it
someone
on the
shows
link.
up.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
Right. In the
Okay.
past, we had, they were versions with each
Yes, there should be.
subsequent meeting.
Definitely.
I'm
Okay.
switching binders.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Welcome.
So today, which binder am I in now? But yes, everyone said thank you, but let's be clear that we really do appreciate the work everyone has put into creating a document of this size and depth and detail. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just want to take the opportunity to thank Lois Trailer for endless perfectionist. So you can see that everything is in place.
That is very fair. Thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, I second.
All right. We are all the way up to action item B, people. Betty provided people with updated agendas when we came in, and so I want to be clear that that's the agenda that we're working off of. So we're up to action item B, which is personnel. Do I have a motion? Do I have a second?
Second.
Any questions or comments? All in favor? Thank you. Action item C is the acceptance of a donation from the North Shore Women's Club to North Shore High School to cover some optional AP test scores, fees, excuse me. Do I have a motion?
Motion?
A second? All in favor? Action D is the approval of the budget transfers. Hang on, I want to make sure I'm looking at the right number. We're approving budget transfers in the amount of $127,000 to cover the teacher assistant position, nurse special education student, and legal fees outside the scope of the retainer. Do I have a motion?
Motion?
A second?
Second.
Thank you.
Just
All in- sorry,
a very
please.
question, I'm fine to go ahead and vote, but we're gonna have a little backup on the legal?
Yes, we can answer that right now for you.
Okay.
Yes.
This is the teacher assistant negotiations,
Mm-hmm.
tab, all the issues with TAs,
Mm-hmm.
The paraprofessionals.
paraprofessionals, Glencoe split property,
Okay.
and all the contracts that we send to you, we always have them reviewed by council.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So the budget transfer, just so we're anticipating expenses moving forward. So hopefully this will carry us through the rest of the year. What precipitated that was about $22,000 that the code was short.
But I thought contract review is considered
It is.
in the scope of the retainer? Yeah.
It
Right.
is.
Okay.
All in favor? Action E is our approval of a memorandum of agreement between the Nassau County Board of Elections and North Shore Central School District. This is our agreement to rent the optical scanning machines and have them programmed to actually read our ballots. Do I have a motion?
Motion?
I think that was the second also. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Thank you. Action item F is the approval of the agreement between North Shore Central School District and Da Vinci Education and Research. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
A second?
Second.
All in favor? Action G, acceptance donation from North Shore Coalition Against Substance Abuse to North Shore Middle School of $810 towards the Parent University on Mental Health in Our Children. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
A second? Questions or comments? All in favor? Thank you. Action H. Okay, thank you, Joanna. Action H is the approval of the agreement between North Shore Central School District and Douglas Florian. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second? Questions or comments? All in favor? Action I is the approval to dispose of inventory, computer at Glenmore Landing School, and 290 workbooks at the Seacliff Elementary School. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. We move next to our second comments from the public. Are there any comments from the public? If you approach the podium and give us your name and town of residence.
Hi, Justin Clutter, Seacliff.
Thank you.
Thank you again for going through the budget, Dr. Chiarezzo.
You're welcome.
So I just, you know, my personal touch here is towards the special education portion of this, and I don't know if you're going through more of that next meeting, but I was just trying to figure out the numbers a little bit, and I see, it's very nice to see that special education is up a little over 700,000, you know, about 6%. I saw the addition of a teacher for 119, and then a 0.4 for another 47, so that, you know, rounding up, you're at 200. I was trying to figure out where the other money is being spent on special education, and maybe you're going to go through that next board meeting. That's fine. If you don't have an answer for that now, then, you know, I'll be here, so that's fine as well. The other side was also, I was trying to get a little bit from you on the position going forward, right? So I heard something about the ILC maybe moving into the Seacliff School. I know you're primarily pushing for inclusion from K through 5, but then I heard K through 1, and then I heard K through 3. So I'm just trying to figure out where everything is, and that's really my question. I know we're not looking for back and forth. I'm just trying to ask. You can
Dr.
respond or not, or
Superintendent, I wish you would.
All right, so a couple of things.
Okay.
So the first question about the teacher that's going in, that's that's to accommodate the expansion of the full-time ICT, K1, 2, and 3. And so some of those costs are offset by some, so the way that's staffed now is there's a full-time teacher and a full-time TA in grades K and 1, in grades 2 and 3, and in grades 4 and 5, right? We piloted a full day in K1. It's going really, really well. So we are not going to need as many TAs because the teachers will be there. So that's where you see the addition of that teacher.
Okay.
Okay. The $40,000 that you talk about, that's to support additional reading support for kids with special needs. Okay. We're going to go through all the ins and outs of the program at our next meeting. That's,
Okay.
That's on the agenda, but just in a nutshell, if I can, so you don't feel like unanswered.
No, that's fine.
Right now, ICT, self-contained, is all at Glenwood Landing.
Right.
There's K1, there's 2, 3. Actually, that's not true. There's like a second grade class because there's a cluster of kids.
Yep.
And so it's all there. We're running out of space. And so we are moving, and we're trying to get more kids in general ed as well. So with the advent of the,
Yep.
full day ICT, that becomes a little bit more possible to do.
Mhm.
So you will see a shift. So where we are likely shifting the ICT back to Seacliff where it once was. Okay. And then over the course of time, the whole program will be, because we don't want kids moving around.
Right.
Right. So once they're placed in a class, we want them to be able to stay where they are, not have to move schools to the extent that we can. So
That makes sense.
there'll be ICT or ILC.
ILC.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In K1 at Seacliff. The rest of the ILC program next year will likely stay at Glenwood Landing.
Mhm.
And so the new kids, as they come in, will all transition back to Seacliff, right? But the kids who are in Glenwood Landing will stay at Glenwood Landing. And then the program will be structured full day ICT K, 1, 2, 3. 4 and 5 will remain in the split model for one more year.
Okay.
Okay.
And one follow-up to that, you can
Yeah.
answer or not, is that maintaining at the do we have the ICT at each school? I'm not familiar if it's at each school, or is it just at?
It's not.
Okay.
So the full day, we're placing the full days where kids are clustered.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the trade-off is that for having the full day support for kids, we don't actually have the kids to do it at all 3 schools. So the CSE is working with families on that. And then to the extent that that is not what they want, we're finding ways to accommodate their kids' needs in other ways.
Okay.
Okay. But we're going to go through all this in
Couple weeks.
painstaking detail on the 28th.
I will see you then.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Very good. You're welcome.
Rob Mazzella, Glen Head.
Thank you.
Just have I guess, question. Rob's not here, but and maybe for next time, if you could get back to me on it. Well, I'm a big fan of the National History Day project that was done. It did take up a good part of the first half of the year in the 8th grade social studies class. I'm very concerned that they're not going to have time to do a meaningful scrub through the entire curriculum in what's left of this year. I don't know if that was brought up or discussed, what the ramifications of that are as they enter high school. Just wanted to get some feedback on that.
I can do that too.
Okay.
So, yes, we have thought it through. Yes, we have talked about all of it, and yes, we have a plan so that there will be no lost instruction in the scope and sequence.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Public comment? Thank you. We will move on. We're up to old business. Trustees, do we have any old business? Under either old or new business, we could discuss having agendas for executive session if you wanted to.
Oh, okay, no, sorry, Matt.
I think we could do it either way. So I didn't want it to get bumped another 2 weeks.
Thank you.
No.
So I guess that goes into new business.
Okay, that's fine with me.
So, over the years, we've sort of flip-flopped back and forth between having an agenda, an executive session.
By
the-
which you mean like really like written?
But just
1,
like
2,
an
3, 4,
agenda,
5,
just like
yeah.
this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we do know what's going on in executive session because we do get the board updates, which
Yeah.
tells us what's going on in executive session. But from the time the board update comes out to the time we meet, sometimes items are added or changed. Technically, under the training that we received and under policy, we're supposed to have an agenda for executive session. And I think it would be helpful to keep us on track if we knew the scope of what needed to be covered in that hour that we have to meet. So I'm requesting that we make a regular practice of having an agenda for executive session.
I certainly have no objection to, like, tightening it up a little bit and just having a clean list in front of everybody.
And I think will help us keep track of things that, if we keep them, what have gone on, that we need follow-up on, that we don't always get. It will help us keep the old business calendar portion going
And
as
you're
well.
right, it's kind of come and gone and. over
Right,
the years,
I
and
just
it's
find
not
it helpful personally. It works with my type A personality.
Do we need to have anything more formal than just a little
I think we
discussion?
can just
All right, so that
agree.
sounds good to me.
That's
We'll
probably
make it so.
fine with it.
Can I just offer one comment?
I wish you would.
When you go into exec, the motion should cover all of the issues on the agenda. I don't know that you need an agenda, that's up to you folks. The reality is, you should approve all of the subjects you're going to be discussing in exec, and that's the only part that needs to be made public. You don't have minutes from the exec, but you do, in the motion, indicate what the
What
areas
we,
are that
yes.
we're discussing. So I don't know that you need an agenda so much as the motion should indicate the 3 or 4 areas
Right.
that you're going to be discussing.
So
That's definitely true.
I would just say maybe the attorneys can just give us a little boilerplate of what that would be and those 3 or 4 menu options, and we'll choose the ones that are applicable. And then the agenda itself is a tool that I think Mary Ann is right, would help us all to stay on task, so that works.
Yeah, so so the one that I gave you earlier was set up exactly that way. So if
Right.
you looked, right, is that what you were talking about? So it had the broad area, right, so discuss the employment of a particular person, whatever it
Right.
is, right?
Right, the one, yes,
Right.
the motion we made before about.
Exactly,
leave
and
to
then
appointment,
the
employment,
items were there
promotion,
for you, so you had both.
payroll,
Right.
I'll
litigation.
go over it with you. Okay, it's no problem, but we'll
But I
just make
think-
we'll make it a practice moving forward. It's no
But
Thank
what we
you.
did today was, met that. We had the motion that covered, it did cover our
Okay.
agenda, but the agenda could also be written down differently, and that would be more obvious.
The only concern I have about an agenda is that if you have an existing agenda which becomes part of the public record, we have to be cautious that we're going to be discussing confidential matters that belong in executive session. We don't want anything on the agenda that would reveal confidentiality. So you just need to be cautious.
Broad terminology, you know, just use broad terminology. You don't have to make
That's what I'm
specific.
saying. That's why
Right.
I'm not sure you really need a written agenda. You need a motion that covers the 3, 4, or whatever it is topics to be talked about.
It's helpful to me.
It's up to you.
Okay. Good? Everyone-
Good.
Okay. Do we have other old business? Other new business? I had a note to put transportation limits on the agenda for the vote, but we covered it. We were able to cover more of it than I thought we would.
When does the board wish to discuss the demographic study? Do you have a timeline?
Do we know when we'll have the capacity study?
I don't,
come
but
back
I can
out?
find out and time them together if that helps
Right,
you.
if it's not gonna be like, 10 years from now, it seems better to discuss it all together.
Okay. Yes?
I think when we do the demographic study and the capacity study, it should be done with the bond
Mhm.
discussions. So I think we should try and time it in that way, because I think some of the projects that we're looking at make more sense when you look at the capacity will make more sense when you look at the capacity study.
Right, so to the extent that I can make it happen, it would be, because we'll have the architects here on February 28th to
Right.
present to the board. To the extent that I can get something together for you and that I have the documents, we can fold it into that discussion. That actually makes good sense.
That'll be by the 28th?
I will try.
We may have to have the architect. I'm sure that February 28th will not be the only time we'll have the architect, so we can have
might
that
be right about
discussion
that.
if the capacity study's not available at another time when the architects are here.
Okay.
We're
I think I am almost certain, but not like 100% that the field work is complete
Okay, great.
for the capacity study.
I heard you say field, I was like, what? Never mind, I thought you were talking about something entirely different. Anything else? What time is it?
10:25.
Okay. But there was the discussion of whether we needed to discuss a matter of pending litigation.
It's like 5-10 minutes.
I think we can be real quick with it.
I think it could be very quick, and we could possibly ask to have the room, and that would save us a minute or two, too. Well, I've got to make a motion, though. I'd like to make, maybe it has to be two motion found. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn the public meeting and go into executive session for the purposes of discussing pending and current litigation.
Motion.
All in favor? Public, thank you very kindly.